Good morning, I'm Rebecca Franco-Martin, and this is Daria Waltz. We're volunteers at the Brookdale Center for World War II Studies and Conflict Resolution under the directorship of Paul Zygo. This morning we'd like to introduce Todd Smith.
Todd Smith.
Yes, he was a Navy Seabee, and he's going to be telling us his story this morning.
Okay, my name is Todd Smith. I enlisted in the Navy in 1944, August 1944. I left high school to join the Navy. I enlisted and was actually assigned to a Sampson Training Center boot camp for about 3 weeks. At that point, I was in the Navy, and they assigned me to the Seabees. And this was a different type of organization than the Navy. It was closer to the Marines. It was very strange at that time because I enlisted in the Navy and I thought that was the Navy going to a ship. But no, I was then transferred to Endicott, Rhode Island for Marine training, Seabees. And then actually given different uniform, more closer to the Marines than the Navy. At that point, I was transferred to Endicott, from Endicott, Rhode Island, went to 29 Palms for training, Seabee training, which would include putting down building airstrips, laying down certain town steel matting for aircraft, fast landing. And then at that point, I also went to San Diego and transferred from Port McHugh on a ship by the name of I didn't recall the name of the ship at the moment, but it was a troop transport ship that started to leave for points unknown. This was a war about latter part of 1945, after I had training and for Seabees and so forth. The ship had some problem, and we landed at Honolulu for a week or so because the ship had a problem with propeller. At that point, after that, we transferred to troop training center at Eniwetok, a little troop training, and then we went on before a trip to Okinawa. Okinawa, approximately June, the latter part of June, 1945, at which time Seabee, the island had just about been secured. So we had, I landed at Buckner Bay. This was about a week after General Buckner had been killed by a sniper from the Japanese. We landed at Okinawa and then presented to start working, building docks and so forth. And I was assigned to operate landing craft and also pile driving and operating bulldozers. At that point, we were building airstrips and improving the island for landing craft or to ships and so forth for delivering supplies to the troops. I had a few interesting experiences, and one was that a bulldozer had broken down in the middle of the landing strip and blocking aircraft from landing, and I had to go out there and start the engine up, which I did, and this was under a Japanese fire, so forth, snipers. They were still on the island. That was okay, and shortly after that I had to experience a typhoon, 130-40 mile an hour winds, and we had to take shelter. I took shelter in an ammunition dump. Things were flying around, and unfortunately we had built our camp, Quonset huts, on top of a hill. And this was a bad choice because the high wind and so forth would take the steel sheathing and so forth, fly around like dangerous missiles. We also had problems with the Japanese kamikazes coming in, and they usually come in in the evening. We were out watching our nightly movie show. They were harassing us. Shortly after that, after the typhoon, which was around July, the summer of July and August.
Of 45.
Of 45.
Okay.
And then at that point of time, the Enola Gay, which I have a copy of Tibbetts, that had a signed copy of Tibbetts that had documented the trip to bomb Hiroshima, and this was in August, around August 6th, around that time. And then shortly after that, the other B-29, which was Boxcar, had dropped the atomic on Hiroshima, Nagasaki. And that plane had a problem coming back and landed at Okinawa and to repair it. At that point of time, I had witnessed the ship and took a picture of it, a boxcar, and also found a pair of wings, assumed that came from that plane, though I cannot guarantee it. And then after that, I had proceeded to work in the various construction battalions. I had, and that a little after that, the war was over. But I remained there because of they were discharging people on points. And I actually, at that point, had been transferred to several different battalions. And the war was over, and our job was mostly to clear up the various equipment in the island. What we did was put the equipment on barges and take them out to sea and dump them over. They didn't want the stuff to come back to the United States. This was airplanes, jeeps, and all kinds of military paraphernalia, loaded on barges and took them out to sea and threw them overboard.
And was there a reason for that, or?
Yes, they didn't want it to come back to the States. The jeeps and planes, or mostly jeeps, that would upset the economy or something. That's my idea.
Okay.
And that was my job for about 6 to 8 months after the war was over, taking stuff out to sea. And meanwhile, before it went out to sea, I would take some equipment off it to salvageable equipment, which I thought was airplane instruments and gyroscopic compasses and different things like that, because I just couldn't see that stuff going to sea, I thought perhaps. So we could use it as surplus or whatever. Of course, this went on, and as they started sending troops back to the States, we would be retransferred to different organizations all the way down the line. Got a little bit better and better as it went, because small organizations, the food seemed to be better, and we enjoyed it, and I had a great time. Also, during that time, I accumulated a salvaged boat, which we developed and used as a fishing boat, and take the standing crew out and the officers and so forth for fishing. And that was a recreational device. And, it was very good. And we had a great time. Because, we were sort of free over there, do what we wanted to do. So I had jeeps, I had motorcycles, I had trucks, I had pontoon little barges, and we had a lot of equipment and all kinds of bulldozers and cranes and things to play around with, and just to pass the time. It was a sort of a great time. And I was very lucky that I was born when I was in 1926, because if it had been a year earlier, I would have probably been in the Navy on an aircraft carrier, and it was a very bad situation in Okinawa prior to when I got there early.
How old were you, sir, when you...
I was turning 18, and I left high school the senior year because I would rather go into the Navy than be drafted.
Okay.
Do you remember anything about your basic training or boot
Basic
camp?
training was Sampson, New York State, and this was actually a 6-week training. So we went through the basic calisthenics and so forth, the Navy boot camp, and at the end of that, there was a draft. They would go take various personnel and put them in different units, like amphibious corps, and other ones go aircraft carriers and so forth. I was selected for Seabees, which was really great. It was a different organization entirely than the Navy sailors. It was, like I say, a Marine sort of a situation. And
Now, you said you went to 29 Palms in California.
I went to 29 Palms.
Did you take a train?
29 Palms was Seabee training, learning how to build airstrips for aircrafts and so forth. And we particularly, but in that case, I was very lucky because I decided that it would be much better to volunteer for night duty, which was fire watch. In this case, we had tents out there, had kerosene stoves, and I would get up at 9 o'clock at night, spend the whole night just walking around for fire. And when the bugle called in the morning, wake everybody up, I was off duty, so I had the whole day to myself.
A little cooler too
And
than
it
working
was
at
cool
night.
in the morning, and I walked out in the desert, and it was very great. And there was a song at that time, was "Don't Fence Me In." We had lots of land, and the starry skies above, and I could do that out in the desert. So that was 29 Palms. And then 29 Palms, we went to a little time. Oh, I had a little problem. I had an ear infection, and that, otitis media, picked that up. And that lasted for about 3 weeks or so. Went to the hospital. At first, they didn't know what that was, and I said, I had earache or something like that. But finally, I went to Los Angeles.
To a military hospital?
To a medical hospital.
Okay.
And this was for about 2 or 3 weeks. And then when I started getting better, they asked me to clean the floor. So I knew I was getting better. So I didn't stay in bed that long.
Okay.
And then we went back to the group, back to the battalion, the 6th Battalion.
And you said you went to San Diego for a little
And
while?
San Diego, San Francisco,
Oh.
Camp Parks in San Francisco, a little more training. And then from there on, we shipped out from Point Mugu. That's about a little bit north of San Diego.
Do you remember anything about the trip over?
The ship over,
Was it
again,
good weather,
was
or-
the USS Comet. That's what it was.
Oh,
It was old troop transport. And like I said before, we started sailing, and it's about cruise 8 knots or so, you know. And the end result, of course, was Okinawa, but we didn't know that, so we couldn't identify that. And the ship went through zigzagging, of course, lights out and all that. And then it broke down, and spent a week or so at Honolulu. And this was this was something that we would normally not have done, but the ship went out. And then that delayed a week or so. And this is towards the, Okinawa campaign. So it was in full float. And Okinawa, of course, it started in April of 45, and it was ended at about the 28th of June, just about the time we landed at Okinawa. So I was very fortunate. And of course, I got off the ship, climbed off the side of the ship on landing nets into a BP visual landing craft, and went ashore, and hit Okinawa at the point where Buckner was shot a week or so before, and we call that Buckner Bay, and that's the southern part of Okinawa, and that was the last stand of Okinawa.
Was there still a lot of enemy fire from,
Well,
the
yeah,
Japanese
they had
planes?
snipers, and of course, and was still, even though it had island was secured, that didn't mean that all the Japanese were not hiding in caves and so forth.
Right.
So it was dangerous. We landed, had a truck, went up on a truck, and I had a carbine gun on the way to camp, and they said, if you see anybody on the side, shoot. So it was dangerous. But like I say, I was very fortunate. You know, I got through this whole thing without any problems.
And you said that you were there and you were aware that the Enola Gay was going to drop the bombs. And,
Yes, yes.
And how did
Well,
you?
I can't say that I knew that they were doing it. I heard it after it happened, after the fact.
How did you feel about it when you found out?
Well, see, we were on Okinawa troops to invade Japan,
Right.
and it was a very dangerous situation. And that's why we were stationed at Okinawa, the troops and all. And of course, once the bomb was dropped, a week or so after that, the war was over. And this is great. But we would get the news from the States. And, you know, we didn't really know exactly when they dropped at that time. It didn't happen, but we just...
Did you have like a
later,
little
I did.
celebration with all?
So,
Do you remember anything about the time? Did you celebrate with your other, when you heard the bomb had been dropped and the war was over? And then you had to stay, you said, for a little
well, it
while.
was a great celebration. I mean, everything, and shortly after that, of course, then they start to send the troops back home. And since I was there last, I stayed there for about 6 or 8 months after that was over. But we were great. I was very happy. But I was happy in the Navy, too. We were having a great time. As a matter of fact, shipping back, when I shipped back, we were discharged at Lido Beach. On the way back to Lido Beach, I would say, hey, we're going to have to lose all my friends in the Navy, you know, it's going to be different. Because I was young. I was only...
Camaraderie.
I wasn't even, I was just 18. I wasn't even 19 yet. So, you know, it was like an experience. And then I was discharged, and it was sort of sad. And of course, then they put me in the Navy Reserve, which lasted for 4 years, inactive reserve. Unfortunately, I just managed to get out of that before the Korean War. It was 1955. I had a job at Bell Telephone Laboratories, engineering and so forth, and I was working that thing. So I didn't get back in the Navy. I was discharged. But I had a good time in the Navy, like I say, in the Seabees, in the civilian life for about 3 or 4 years after I was discharged. I just hanging around, went to GI Bill of Rights in college and so forth, and just hung around for about 3 or 4 years until I managed to get a nice job.
So is that, did you get an engineering degree?
Yes, I did.
And that was on the
I
GI
started
Bill?
with the GI Bill, which was good, Penn State.
Wow.
Something. So I was very happy with this, but you know, it was, as soon as I was discharged, I went back to finish up my high school, which was my senior year. And that was a very interesting experience. I was 2 years older or 3 years older than the kids there, and also they asked me to get up on the auditorium and give them my little story of my career and so forth. But I was older than the rest of the kids. So, and going back to high school after getting in the Navy, you know, all the experience was very
Different, yeah.
it was different.
A different perspective on life, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, but anyway, I survived that. And then, like I say, I had got a nice job with Bell Laboratories and to sort it out. That was
Do you want to show us your picture? I think you have a picture here of when you were...
This is a picture of me in the Navy. Can you
Oh,
do that?
yes. I remember this.
Handsome.
Well, you've changed a lot, you know.
Yes.
I just turned 86, so, you know, that's sort of...
That's great.
This is one from Harry Truman.
Is this one of your awards? I see here you have the American Theater Medal.
Oh, yes.
The Asiatic Pacific Medal.
Right, this is all in this.
This is a letter of commendation.
This is a letter of commendation from Truman.
So that letter of commendation from Truman.
I remember that one.
Proud, right?
Yeah.
This is my honorable discharge from the Navy. This is another one from the,
Okay, we have honorable discharge here. Okay.
and this is another one that was when I was discharged in June 1954. This is from after
Oh,
my
from
in our,
the reserves.
In reserves, right.
Yeah.
Discharge from the reserves in 54.
Right.
Okay.
And then this is, what else do I have here? States Navy. This is my Navy thing.
Now, is that while you were in service? This
This
photo here?
And so this is the second order of the Golden Dragon. That shows that I went across the, on the 26th of June, across the international date line on the USS Todd. That's the, it went,
I've never
since
seen
we
that.
didn't
Wow.
go across the equator, this is about equivalent to it.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, it's a great picture.
Yeah.
And this is a photo right before the war.
mhm. Now, this is my crew in Okinawa. It shows I'm up here, but anyway, this is my bulldozer and all kinds of equipment that we use in dock building and so
Okay,
forth.
I don't know if you can get close enough. Todd's right here with his
Yeah,
crew
you can't
in
see
the
me,
top
but
of the photo. But it's a neat picture. And that's the bulldozer? It's huge. Wow, okay.
This is my boat that I fixed up after the war was over in Okinawa to take the troops out for
And-
fishing. Now, I don't know if this is of interest, but this is the names of the various people in my camp in Sampson, which was Company D. And
Are these the men that went with you, or these were just the ones that you did your
these are
training
the
with?
fellows in my boot camp at
Okay.
Sampson.
Okay.
I was in 251 Company D, but this is just the names I got this from, but that is not too important. This is my discharge information on here at Lido Beach and so forth when I was with the service. Yeah.
That's discharge papers from Lido Beach. Good, okay.
Now this is, I've been enrolled in the Memorial Foundation, and that's where my picture is. This is the information.
Oh, you're in the Navy Memorial Log.
Right, I'm in
Congratulations.
Memorial Log.
Now, is there anything that stands out in your mind about your time in the service, or just any people that stand out to you that you remember?
Everything I did in the Navy, in the Seabees, was exceptional, very, very important to me. And the service, I enjoyed it very much, and I had a very pleasurable time. It was very nice. They were all good to me. I even enjoyed the food, believe it or not. You know, a few times, I think what I had mentioned before is when I was assigned to start this broken down Caterpillar truck out on the runway in the airport landing field, that I had been able to go out there and use my knowledge to start the thing, which it, in those days had an auxiliary engine on it, gasoline engine, that you'd have to start first to start the diesel. And that engine had broken down, a bearing had burned out, so it was frozen, couldn't turn it over. So I went out there and I unfroze it by reducing, taking the crankshaft down, loosening it up, and so forth, and starting this engine, which I got the generator to the Caterpillar go and drove it off. And that was a very memorable thing because I was
You were
that
young.
was the beginning of the war. I was young, you know, but I was trying to use my knowledge for doing this, which I had.
And you said you were under fire while
Yes,
all that was
absolutely,
happening.
snipers.
So,
Wow.
So it was sort of dangerous, but I was lucky. Like I say, I was very lucky, very fortunate in this war. I enjoyed it, and I used my, well, I always fooled around with cars and so forth when I was civilian life, you know. I worked in building things and doing things and putting a new heating system in my grandmother's house, you know, and things like that. So I was aware of working on things.
So your military experience was a good segue into engineering.
Right, absolutely. So it's like came natural to me. So, you know, you get out of the Navy, you're like seaman second class, and apprentice seaman, and first class seaman, and I made motor machinist mate, third class, and a year I was out there, which is, you know, it's good in those days.
great.
Very good.
So I think that's about it.
Well, we're honored to have you come and tell us
Well,
your
I'm
story.
pleased to be here. It's
Really enjoyed it.
enjoyed, and my son, of course, he's a colonel in the Air Force. My mother was in the First World War. She was in the Navy. She was in Brooklyn Navy Yard, an artist drawing recruitment pictures for
Oh
the
my
Navy.
gosh, wow.
The First World War, my mother. My brother was in the Air Force up in Alaska. My son's in the Air Force. And, my great-grandfather was in the Civil War.
Oh my gosh, long tradition in military.
Todd, he was in the Civil War and on a ship, and down south it was torpedoed by the Southern people. And I have a letter that he had mailed, posted in a ship. It was a Harvest Moon ship that when the boat went down, it was torpedoed, ran by the Southern down there. And I have that letter. He found it. It was in the mailbox on a ship, and then when he was in the water, he picked this letter up.
Wow.
And,
So it was your destiny to serve the country, serve our country.
Yeah.
and it was all about Lincoln. Lincoln was assassinated, and they really missed Lincoln. He said there's a very, very upsetting thing that happened in the letter. So,
Fascinating.
my family's in service.
Yeah.
My grandchild is also in the Air Force. She just went in the Air Force. And my son's daughter. Son's
Brittany.
Brittany.
Yeah.
Brittany's
That's great. You must be proud.
I'm very proud. So all my kids turned out pretty well, all the grandchildren. Okay?
Well, thank
Thank
you
you
very
again.
much, Mr. Smith,
Well,
for
we
telling us your
appreciate it.
story.